Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 35th episode of the Soccer Scene with myself, Adrian, and joined once again by Noel O'Connor. Noel, an absolute huge week for Treaty United. Admittedly, in their short time as an organisation and a football club, it's the biggest week in their history, the short history. We'll build up to the Derry game as it goes on. Obviously, we'll continue our usual format where we'll review the game from last week in the first division. As it turned out, Noel, the result was immaterial. Treaty lost 3-0 to Waterford in the RSC. Waterford, a really informed team at the moment, but because of the result in Cork, where Wexford failed to beat Cork, and we'll obviously go on to Cork as well later in the programme, Treaty were guaranteed playoff position, guaranteed fifth place. So I suppose it was a funny one, Noel. It was a mixed emotions. Obviously, everyone was delighted because you're not going into the final 2 match days hoping for Wexford not to win a game. But I suppose the performance was a bit flat, really.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it was important. We are talking about the biggest game in Treaty's history coming next Sunday. I think it was important that playoff place was nailed down. That it wasn't a kind of a gnawing thing in the back of their mind that, just say, if Wexford had nicked a goal there in the last minute and turned us cross, it would have been certainly a disaster for Cork with the crowd that was there as well, but would have brought the game or that final place to the last game of the season. And, I think it's important for Treaty this week that they have only one focus, and that is the game against Derry, and they weren't thinking about the final league game of the season. Certainly a disappointing game in Waterford, I thought. Thought Waterford were well up for it. We might make an excuse for Treaty being in the semi-final of the FAI Cup until you remember that Waterford United are also in the semi-final of the FAI Cup. And certainly in terms of positioning in the table now, for the last few months we've been talking about a Treaty Galway game, and that they would have no fear against Galway. It's looking more like it'll be a Treaty Waterford playoff game now, and certainly they seem to have the Indian sign over Treaty, particularly in the last 3 games.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the focus has shifted, hasn't it, as you mentioned, because it was just everyone you spoke to was saying, well, they might give Galway a really good game because they have. Treaty and Galway games have been notoriously close. Throughout the last 2 seasons with John Caulfield and Tommy Barrett's side, it's been really close. But then there was that realisation factor hit around, I think it was around the 80th minute when Athlone, took control of that game. Could have been even later. I think it might be the 85th minute when Athlone got a winner in Galway, which really wasn't expected. That was Athlone's first win in Terryland Park since 1997. I know they haven't been in the same division, but no one was expecting that result, I suppose, which really threw everyone off kilter. So all of a sudden now you're looking at it, Waterford in pole position with the form that Galway are in to make that second place. And it's certainly, not the fixture that Treaty United going on the fixtures this season would have wanted.
Certainly not. And you look at the goals, I think outside the first game, the Treaty won 2-1 when Waterford were down to 10 men, maybe early in the first half or certainly midway through the first half. I think it's 2, 3 and 4 goals that Waterford have scored, and you compare that to how difficult Galway have found, to take chances against Treaty. So certainly in terms of the playoff, I think it's a very difficult one. I think it's, where we'd say that they have a bit of an Indian sign over them, certainly in the last few months. And it reminded me a bit of the way UCD played last year in the playoff, where they attacked the wide areas. I think we've touched on it a few times, that the teams that seem to do well against Treaty are the teams that really attack the wide areas, and certainly that double prong attack from the fullback and the wide player in Waterford has certainly inflicted a lot of damage in Treaty, particularly over the last 3 games.
Yeah, certainly. And that was one noticeable thing, Noel, wasn't it? Dara Power and Tamisa Sobowale, the left and right fullbacks respectively, were hugely influential, for Waterford as well. Really, Willie Armstrong and Stephen Christopher, if they switched off for 1 second, Power and Sobowale are gone by them. And then Sobowale set up a goal as well for Raul Uche, which made it 2-0 before half time. That was probably the death knell. But on top of that as well, then, because of the quality that Phoenix Patterson and Junior Quaterna have on the flanks, they gave a really torrid night to Mark Ludden and Ben O'Riordan on Friday.
Absolutely, and look, to be honest with you, I was quite disappointed with the efforts of Stephen Christopher and Willie Armstrong out of possession. And I thought to myself, with the playoff place secured, you're wondering, would Tommy and the coaching staff be thinking, should we not put the 11 that we think that are going to start against Derry into this game? And in fairness to Waterford, their method of playing, if you like, is not that dissimilar to Derry, who are quite strong in the wide areas and like to attack those wide areas of the pitch as well. I'm not so sure if that's what the thinking was, but certainly if it is going to be a case of Stephen Christopher and Willie Armshaw in the wide areas, they're certainly going to have to work a hell of a lot harder than they did last Friday night when Treaty are out of possession. And you would expect similarly to Friday night, where they didn't see a lot of the ball, they're unlikely to see a lot of it against Derry next Sunday either.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of wide players, Noel, it was another frustrating night. And I know from speaking to Joel Costrain, he's incredibly frustrated with his injury record at Treaty United. You know, he'd be in for a game, starting a couple of games, then he'd be gone for another couple of games, back on the substitutes bench. It's just been very stop-start for him. Same thing happened again the other night, brought off the substitutes bench. I think he was barely on 12 minutes when he had to go off again. I suppose just looking at it from a broad point of view, Noel, like, you know, Joel has been with a few clubs now in the League of Ireland. He's been with Cork City. He's been with Athlone. Obviously, been with Shamrock Rovers. Like we said, I mean, when you go back to your hometown club after all those clubs, you know, it kind of strikes you as a last chance saloon sometimes at League of Ireland level. You know, to make a case to stay at this level. So, you know, with the injury record, I wonder, will we see Joel in Treaty colours next year?
Yeah, look, it's disappointing to see a guy come on and go off within 10 or 12 minutes. It wasn't that apparent what happened either. I don't know if we've heard what the problem was. He's certainly a guy with a lot of potential, and we've said it. Seems to, you know, play better when he's confident. And look, I don't think he's going to any other League of Ireland club, certainly. But in terms of maybe will he be with Treaty next year, I suppose he'll have to go through the pre-season again. You know, if there's a few issues that need to be ironed out. He's still very young and has a lot of talent. We speak about local players, you know, and we want to see the local players there. And
actually the last Limerick representative in the squad, Noel, I think.
Yeah, I would believe it. I don't see a huge amount coming through, say, yet from the underage either. And look, it would be disappointing if we didn't see him play anymore. He certainly has that potential, and I suppose, you know, on balance, he'll probably get another shot at it next year, I'd say.
Yeah, and obviously, I think Martin Coughlin is another one, actually, Noel, to correct myself, that he's an Abbeyfield native, I think. So that's two for sure in the squad from Limerick. Obviously, we know there's a plethora of players from the likes of Galway as well. I suppose just to finish on last week, Noel, obviously Cork City were league winners. Apparently, Alex Moody, the Wexford goalie, had a really inspired night, kept them out. You know, I suppose stopped the party, the winning party, I suppose, but that wouldn't have mattered once the final whistle went to Cork City and they returned to the Premier Division. A really good achievement, Noel, it must be said, because, you know, it wasn't that long ago, myself, yourself, and now Jason O'Connor, who isn't with us anymore on the podcast, were speaking about Cork, like last year, about the pressure that Colin Healy was under. I mean, they finished 6th in the league table, but he added a lot to the squad. He brought in experience like Ali Gilchrist. Rory Keaton turned out to be a very good signing for them when we had our reservations about him as well. You know, and with the pressure that comes with that Cork job, you know, Colin Healy has delivered in his second season.
Absolutely, it's fantastic for them. Look, they'll be delighted to get back up there. And look, if it was a big test to get out of the first division, I think it'll certainly be even a bigger test to stay in the Premier League. You saw what Shelbourne had to do last year. They changed their manager. You know, we spoke about it here. We're not sure if there's even one member of the squad still there who was there, you know, as part of that league winning side. And I think, you know, there'll be a lot of work to do in Cork as well. The standard of that Premier League has really gone high across the board, I think, unlike before, where you might have had one or two teams that were a bit ahead of the rest. You know, certainly the standard is really, really high. But Cork, like, in fairness, when they are in the Premier, they do get the crowds, they do get the commercial support as well. But I think it's another busy off season, if you like, for Colin Healy, and some of the lads that maybe have got them to that Premier League mightn't be the ones that will keep them there. But we'll wait and see how that goes in the off season.
Yeah, I think when we were researching it, Noel, earlier in the year, I think we picked 5 players that remained in the Shelbourne squad. as a whole, which just shows you the turnover. Like when you generally have a squad of about 22 players in pre-season, very full first team players. But just to go on your point, Noel, and we were distraught, I suppose, in some ways in Munster last year when you looked at the way the Premier Division layout was. We finally have a Munster team back. I mean, we have a rivalry with Cork City in most sports, and obviously we slag about Cork City's maybe arrogance in some ways, but I have to say I'm delighted to see Cork City back in the Premier Division and have a Munster representative. We might have two, depending on how Treaty and Waterford do in the playoffs. But, it is great. And as you said, they always are a great addition to the league. And hopefully this time, Noel, it'll be a bit more stable for a longer period.
Yeah, I think so. In fairness, he signed a lot of young players as well. The likes of Leon Britton and a couple of more lads like him, and there's goals in them, and they'll relish the opportunity to play in that Premier League. It'll be interesting to see if Ali Gilchrist stays with them. Surely he'll want a shot at the Premier League at this stage. I thought it was an interesting one for him to go to Cork and not stay with Shelbourne and have a chance in the Premier, but he'll certainly get his opportunity now. But look, I mean, the potential there is massive in Cork. It always is. And hopefully they'll stay up there, and we'll get 1 or 2 more Munster representatives up there in the next couple of years.
Hopefully. And speaking of that, Noel, without going into the specific Ali Gilchrist case, but I know I talked to you about it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and isn't there a certain level of player that sometimes don't really actually want to go to the top tier? We mentioned it when you were the manager. You have certain players that just moved to clubs that get promoted out of the first division, but they just go to one of the favourites in the first division again next year and never play in the Premier. Maybe that's from work reasons. I'm not fully sure, to be honest with you, but maybe Ali Gilchrist might be one of them as well.
He might be, but we spoke about a few heartbreakers, all right, like Andy Myler, who break your heart with that loan, and then the following year he turned up with Drogheda or someone, and Trevor Vaughan was another one who I think broke my heart for about 4 years in a row. And
4 different clubs.
With 4 different clubs is right. And then you have, like, it just shows you the golfing standard really. Look, my own ex-club, Danny Furlong, highest goal scorer in the first division when Wexford won the league, and I think that he may well have got 3 goals the following season in the Premier. So let's not be under any illusion, of the golf in the standard. I know obviously we're looking at one-off games in the cup, but over that 36 game schedule, it's certainly very attritional, and only the real best can stay up there.
Absolutely. And there's no time like the present, Noel, to move on to the big semi-final on Sunday. It's live on RT2, 2 o'clock. Treaty United travel to the Ryan McBride Brandywell to play Derry City. Noel, we mentioned it already maybe 3 weeks ago when the draw was made. It couldn't have been worse in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's a 4G pitch, which obviously Treaty admitted themselves they haven't exactly been brilliant on this season, particularly against that lone town. And Tommy Barrett said they would have to improve against Maynooth, and obviously he'll be hoping for an even bigger improvement against Derry on that surface. But the huge vocal Derry crowd that will be there as well. Derry's second in the Premier Division. I mean, it's an absolutely mammoth task, isn't it?
Well, it is, and that's kind of the beauty of it all. That they've nothing to lose going there. They've secured their playoff place. It was interesting. I heard Rory Higgins talking a few weeks ago, talking about how it would be to lead Derry City into an FAI Cup final, and that was before the semi-final. So it probably was a bit of a Freudian slip for him. They'll certainly be up against it as well, and the pressure will be on them to do well if Treaty can keep it scoreless, for 15, 20, 25 minutes in the first half. I know myself what it's like up there. They're certainly going to have to work tremendously hard, a lot harder than they worked last Friday night. The 4G pitch, I think, does make it a bit more difficult, and it's a very big wide pitch as well. But a lot of seasoned campaigners in that Treaty team, I said it a few weeks ago, it won't be lost on the likes of Mark Ludden and Enda Kern that this is a real opportunity that may not come their way, anytime soon again. I remember being in dressing rooms with managers saying to players, this could be the highlight of your career. People don't realise it at the time, but for many of them, it'll probably be the biggest game that they'll ever be involved in. And from that point of view, they certainly shouldn't leave anything behind. I think it's going to be more about work rate, and sheer hard graft and resilience, and putting your body on the line. And they'll certainly have to have a change of mindset from last Friday night. But look, it's a different game again, and I'm sure Tommy will have him ready. I'm sure he has a plan as well, and it'll be interesting to see what his first 11 will be.
And I know obviously we hear quips from Tommy sometimes Noel playing down Treaty's chances in league games against certain opposition. But in fairness, when I heard him in local media today, he has said that, you know, when you're at this stage of the competition, you have to believe you can win. And that is certainly, surely that'll course through the veins of Treaty players. Surely they have to believe that there's an opportunity there to actually turn Derry City over. I suppose as well, Noel, you know, people are, you know, unsure as to what will happen in terms of the goalkeeping position. It's one we've discussed, obviously, maybe 2 or 3 times before as well. Conor Wynne started against Waterford United last week, or sorry, Waterford FC as they're now known, last week. And obviously played in the FAI games before that. Now, there's 2 schools of thought on this note. There's people that say that Conor Wynne played because it's a warm-up for him starting against Derry City at the weekend. And some say that maybe Tommy Barrett wanted to appease Conor Wynne and maybe let him down gently by playing him in the league game and having Jack Brady, ready for the Derry game. I mean, what one do you fall under?
I'm not sure in terms of appeasing anyone, but I think there's no doubt. But Jack Brady will be starting. You know, we would have been at the UCD game where, say, early in the game, Conor Wynne had a couple of parries, if you like, and there was no one to pounce on him. We saw it again on Friday night where it looked like Waterford had scored, but it was ruled out for offside. I think there's no doubt that Jack is certainly the better keeper of the two, and he'll certainly start, I think, on Sunday.
Yeah, and speaking of the approach, Noel, you mentioned it already. It's going to be about hard work, resilience, defending, throwing the bodies on the line. That's the minimum, unfortunately, it will take to get Derry City to the last few minutes of the game, maybe even in a draw game. But in terms of the team, Noel, you did mention there about, you know, Willie Armstrong, Stephen Christopher, the reservations you had about the work rate on the wings. Look, do you think that, you know, normally Tommy has played, we'll say maybe 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 in recent games. Do you think it'll be more of a flat 4-5-1? And if so, do you think maybe work rate on the wings, will Tommy kind of change things up, and will he look at it and say maybe Willie Armstrong's too much of a risk in this game? I'll play Matt Keane because all they're going to be doing is sitting in, or do you play him because, you know, he might do something magical for you on the break?
Yeah, and I think we've said this a few times, and I remember being told by an experienced manager, you know, be sure you're solid on one side of the pitch. Whereas last Friday night, I think they weren't solid on either side of the pitch. I think in the last few weeks, I think Stephen Christopher has played more in a central role, and I think he's done well. You know, it's probably his best 4 or 5 weeks of his time with Treaty. And look, we assume that Dean George is out. There was no sign of him, and we hear that, you know, he's medial ligament damage, whatever. So I was surprised that Stephen Christopher didn't start in that kind of 10 role on Friday night. I do think that Matt Keane should start. I think, you know, traditionally, particularly last year when it was more of a backs against the wall season, if you like, I thought he was really good. And I was a bit surprised that he didn't get an earlier or even a start and maybe get an hour into him or 70 minutes into him. I think it's a player like him is certainly going to be important on that right-hand side of the pitch, you know, when you're faced with the likes of Michael Duffy, who, you know, a couple of years ago, was being spoken about as a full Irish international, and certainly has hit a bit of form in the last few weeks with a few goals, and he'll certainly be one to watch on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, some of the goals that Michael Duffy scored and all have been out of the blue in games, so it just shows you what you're up against. Even if Derry aren't playing well, some player like that can, and Patrick McElhenney or the likes can pull something out of the bag from very little. I suppose, Noel, they got a bit of a taste of it, like you said, Treaty, especially the full backs, as to what they might be facing, like from Ryan Graydon and Michael Duffy the weekend last week against Waterford. And maybe being a bit unfair in some ways here, and I don't think this would happen, but maybe Ben O'Riordan, for instance, you know, looks to me more like a centre-back, has played as a centre-back before. On a pitch now, like Derry, as you said, so wide, where he might become isolated at times against the likes of a Michael Duffy. Do you think that, you know, would you have any fears on that front, or would you kind of stick with him in that position for this game?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what was happening on Friday. Sometimes it's difficult to see, but certainly he got a lot of dig outs, if you like, from Mark Walsh. I felt in the first 25 or 30 minutes, I wasn't quite sure what was going on. And, Jack Lynch's positioning was a bit strange. He seemed to be isolated up the pitch with Enda Curran, like as if he had a detail to man mark Noel O'Keefe, which, the way Waterford play, you're as well off to sit in your own half of the pitch as opposed to have a kind of a 50-yard gap. And, you could see the frustration. I know he was booked for, not agreeing with kind of what I thought was a stonewall good decision by a referee. Fantastic tackle in the box by Killian Cantwell when he dispossessed Success Erdogan, who I thought kind of delayed a bit too long in getting his shot away. But, is he could he play Jack Lynch there? I think he possibly could. There's certainly a lot of thought. Look, he'll be looking at the lads this week. There's obviously going to be a lot of nervous energy around the place, which is important to kind of dampen down all that, because some guys can be spun out even before the game starts. But I would definitely say that they need to be very compact, and Ben O'Riordan will certainly need a lot of help from the person, whoever's in front of him, and certainly again from a figure like Mark Walsh, who would be to the left of him if we think that's the way the back four will be picked.
Yeah, and in terms of the approach to the game, Noel, before the game now, which is, maybe in the day before it or the days leading up to it, but I know that when Tommy was asked recently about, the approach, will you go the night before the game or on the day of the game? I'm assuming Treaty will definitely go the night before. And he said, you ideally prefer in some cases to have players in their own bed, but the night before a game. But that's in an ideal world, Noel. I assume it's non-negotiable. The Treaty will go up the night before.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think what we did, like we didn't go all the way to Derry. I know we were playing the night, and there was a bit of to and fro in the club. They seemed to be more anxious to be there to stay the night after the game so they could have a few drinks. But I was more interested in maybe what might happen in the game.
We know you wouldn't be interested in a drink.
No. We actually stayed in Bundoran, which like it broke the back of the journey, because there was a long day, if you like, the following day with an even kickoff. But even if Treaty, I think, certainly would need to break the back of that journey on Saturday night, and you can plan your day then a bit easier in terms of your travel and your pre-match. But it's certainly not a trip to be made on the day, particularly with a 2 o'clock kickoff.
And I know that obviously Treaty, and when speaking to Jack Brady, he said that they now train on Mondays and Wednesdays. Noel, I assume you'll have at least one more get together before even a Saturday. You'd imagine before a game, or as you said, maybe the get together will be on Saturday before you travel to Derry.
Yeah, or possibly, look, as you've already said it, there's a fairly strong Galway contingent there. I'm sure that they could travel up and do a session somewhere in Galway. I'm sure they have, a club would help them out there, and then maybe go from Galway up on the Saturday evening, and that's probably the way to go, I'd say.
Yeah, hopefully we will be discussing what we'll term as a miracle, Noel, next week. It's hard to believe Treaty will come out, with all due respect, on the end of the result, but who knows? We could be in the Aviva Stadium yet, Noel, 5-star maybe hotel the night before the game. Who knows? We could be discussing it.
We'll have to be discussing our hotel plans as well as Treaty United for that, yeah.
Absolutely. We'll have to be well fed and found, I'd imagine. But just to move off the Treaty United FAI Cup run now, Noel, a final note. Probably a sour note, I suppose, in some ways. The Republic of Ireland Euro 2024 draw probably couldn't have went too much worse for Stephen Kenny, because look, we were expecting to get two fairly heavy hitters as the first and second seeds. We weren't let down with that. There was Netherlands and France as the two seeds ahead of us. We were in the third pot. But unfortunately as well, Noel, what's gone under the radar slightly is we got one of the tougher teams probably in pot 4 as well, who would be right on a par with us at least, I'd imagine, really, especially on any given night. So Stephen Kenny, although he says his players will be looking forward to it, which you will, and we do have performances in the team. It was incredibly tough.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the Greece one, because the issue is they may well get a good result against France or Netherlands, and then kind of people would say, oh, they've only Greece now, and they're always the ones that seem to be difficult for Ireland, because look, we can go back over the years and we've had some great performances against the against the like of Italy and Germany, and even the Portugal performances by Ireland, 12 or 18 months ago were not too bad either. And you'd have to think that, that the team will be better next March, and I think I wouldn't be that particularly worried about those games. I think those games look after themselves. Obviously it'll be unrealistic to think that we'll win too many of them, but I think the group for Ireland will be kind of decided on the 2 games against Greece, and that's probably the game that will give you the most worry.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose what irks you a tiny bit more, Noel, is when you look at maybe like the group that Northern Ireland got, and you see Denmark, Finland, Slovenia, and you think to yourself, if we had that, we might have had some more of a chance. But as you said, though, Ireland have a tendency to be able to get themselves up for big performances against bigger teams. But it's when we have to open up and attack sides and go out and get results and wins ourselves, when the impetus is on our own players, is when we really struggle. And you hope by the time that comes around, all that maybe, I suppose this is the defining moment for Stephen Kenny, isn't it? It's what he's been building up for the last couple of years. He's always said that qualification for the Euros is where he'll really be judged. He's even said it himself, and most commentators have said that. So unfortunately the start isn't great. He's got France in the first game, but this is probably a defining period now in the first few months of that for Stephen Kenny.
Well, I think there's no doubt about that. It is a defining moment, but I suppose if you want to go out in a blaze of glory, you may as well do it against the likes of France and Holland, and not be doing it against the likes of Slovenia and maybe North Macedonia, who would be another one that people would look at and think that that's a handy kind of a match. Yet they put it up to a lot of teams in the last 2 years, but certainly they're massive games for the likes of ourselves to look forward to. It'll be just fantastic to see the likes of Mbappe, for example, and Griezmann, and the likes of maybe Paul Pogba, and playing against this Irish team. And as I said already, they're the games that the Irish team, they seem to overachieve in those matches. So look, it's something to look forward to.
Absolutely, and thanks once again to Noel O'Connor. And as we said, on a final note, we wish Treaty United the best luck on Sunday, and we will be glued to it ourselves. Quite unfamiliar, I suppose, of us to be watching on RT2 and not being at the away game, but hopefully they can do it. And